Welcome, IT changemakers, to the DEX Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Hello, changemakers. You know what it is. It's the DEX Show's show within a show where we speak to fascinating next thinkers about their specialism, if you will. And today, very happy to welcome, along with Megan and Oriana, John Connell to the show. Hey, John, how's it going?
It's going well. How's everything with you?
It's very well. We're always happy to do this. And we've had a bit of a break, bit of a hiatus from doing these, John, because of all the experiences which have been going on the last month. We've been, as a team, jetting around the world, so to speak, and helping to put those events on. Did you make it to Boston, John?
I did not, although there's talks that next year I might be heading that way, maybe to more than one, but this year I didn't make it to any.
Yeah, well, you should come along. They are a good time for all concerned. I should mention you are a field security director, and that's the sort of topic we're going to be delving into today. But I just begin by telling the audience something about yourself and your role here at Nexthink.
Yeah, I've been at Nexthink for coming up on 3 years. And so my role primarily is to answer questions that come in from customers, primarily about security. Some other things sort of sneak their way in about AI and, support issues and things like that, stuff that customers want to know about. But I would say, 90% of the questions I get are security related in one way, shape, or form. And then in addition to that, I often review contracts where there are specific security terms where, customers are asking us for, some specific thing that we're going to do from a security perspective, or steps we're going to take, or processes, things like that. And make sure we can accommodate those in the course of their contract. So, I answer questions from existing customers that, have been with us for a long time, and some, and from new customers that are, contemplating a purchase.
Excellent. Well, you're going to be used to being asked questions then, John, which is good, because I know Oriana in particular is champing at the bit to talk security, privacy, and compliance, as we're going to be discussing. But I think, first of all, John, give us an overview as to why these issues matter in particular to DEX platforms, kind of specifically.
Well, I'd say that, as opposed to buying Microsoft Word or buying an, Office 365, email account or something like that, the way that DEX software has to perform generally requires, a lot of interaction with users' desktops, which is going to, have some function of, heightened levels of permissions. You're going to be seeing technical data come in from, applications from the endpoint itself, potentially some networking things, like when you look at, the performance of collaborative tools like Teams and Zoom and things like that. So, when a customer is making a decision to purchase something, they're going to be, putting something into their environment. And as we know, with a lot of customers, they already have a lot of stuff running in their environment. They may have 20 agents running on a machine already. And in our case, we'll be the 21st coming along. So, before they make a purchasing decision, they're going to want to make sure that they're comfortable with the tool that they're buying. They want to understand how it's working, and they want to make sure that we're going to be protective over their data after we get it. So, it definitely plays a central role in this sort of environment.
Thanks for that context, John. Can you tell us a little bit more about what differentiates Nexthink's approach to security, privacy, and compliance specifically, especially given the importance of those two DEX?
Yeah, I mean, I would say Nexthink is sort of uniquely positioned since it originated and its origins and heritage were, a European company. So, having started in Switzerland, privacy was top of mind, maybe more so than, some American-based companies. And so when I look at it, a lot of the existing concerns an organization might have about privacy and compliance were sort of fundamentally baked into the product from its origins. When you couple that with the investments and the the processes and the tools and the support that we provide on the security side, I would say that it allows organizations to feel comfortable with what we have in place from a security standpoint, from a data protection standpoint. And we've taken great lengths to ensure that our security not only is sort of built into the product, but also maintained, right? So we have a number of certifications, country-based certifications, and then also industry-based certifications like ISO and SOC 2. And then we have certain governmental or regional certifications like Cyber Essentials in the UK, ENS in Spain, so forth. So it's something that we know our customers are going to require for this type of platform, and so as a result, it's definitely top of mind when designing new features and functions.
That makes sense. Can you talk to us a little bit more about how we implement that security? Maybe tell us a little bit more about Nexthink's vulnerability management process and how we implement those safeguards and make sure that our users are protected in real time.
Yeah, so we have obviously a lot of different components we have to worry about. We've got the collector itself that is going to get installed on users' machines. We've got our backend platform, which is hosted in AWS. So when you look at that, we've got infrastructure, we've got the application level, and then we've got the the actual collector, and then some of our browser extensions that we have for like AppX and things like that. So all of those things have to be included under the umbrella of security. Like we can't sort of say, well, our AWS environment is secure, but the rest of the stuff we do our best. Like everything has to work together, and everything has to have the same level of security baked in. So when we go through things like pen testing, we have essentially what amounts to a continuous pen testing process, right? So our first pen test of the year is a full scope pen test. That means that everything from the collector to our application level to our network level, hosts, servers, everything is included in that pen test and part of that scope. Then with each new release that we come along with another pen test, right? So anything that's been added to the tool. So if we get to release 2025.2, 2025.1 is going to be a full scope pen test for the entire platform, including the collector, including the browser extensions, including all those things. And then when you get to .2, then all the new features and functions that are baked into the product for that release get included as part of the testing, right? So the idea is that nothing gets added to the tool over time that isn't subject to testing, and the results of those tests then are fed back into our vulnerability management program, that get addressed, per our policies and so forth. So the idea is that we're iteratively fixing, building new functions, testing those, identifying things, fixing, so on and so forth, so that cycle continues all the time. We also do some additional things on the vulnerability side, like tracking some components of our tool, right? So if we include some open source component, that gets tracked for vulnerabilities. So if a vulnerability pops up 6 months from now, on some subcomponent that we're using, that gets tracked and identified and included as part of our vulnerability management. And then we do some other things, around the vulnerability side, like making sure our AWS environment is hardened. We do, an annual test with a third party that goes through and checks all of our settings in AWS to make sure nothing's exposed, make sure all of our accounts are set up appropriately, permissions are granted appropriately, all those sorts of things. So it's for some organizations, you do an annual pen test and you're, sort of good enough for that year, and you check the box and you move on to the next year and hope for the best. For us, I mean, it's sort of a constant grind, right? It's like a treadmill where you're always on it. And, as a result, there's always something getting fixed, and there's always something new that pops up, and you add that to the list and you address it based on its risk. So, we're very risk focused, right? So if we had, since I've been here in 3 years, there have probably been less than half a dozen, things that have popped up in the sort of in the cyberspace that draw a lot of attention. Like when I first got here, there was a big concern with Log4j, which was basically an industry-wide concern, with massive implications and high levels of criticality, high levels of risk. Like for us, that was identified, and immediately we sort of dropped everything to go deal with that. And I believe we had most of our major remediations in place within 48 hours. If something is a small level of risk or some little informational thing, like it still gets added to the list for us to fix, but it might take us 60 days or something like that to put in a fix for it, and we'll sort of work through that. But it requires sort of eternal vigilance, and you're on that treadmill 365 days a year basically.
Yeah, I mean that seems to me to be the nature of security, is you're sort of always anticipating those different problems and trying to get ahead of them. Can you tell us a little bit more about those? Yeah.
One thing to sort of add to that is it's sort of like the carnival game Whack-A-Mole, right? Like little moles are
Yes.
popping up, and you got to hit them with the hammer. Like as soon as you come up with something and fix something, there's another bad guy or another malintended person out there somewhere that comes up with something new, and then you've got to chase that down, right? So it never stops and keeps going. But as a result, we built our processes around that.
Yeah, for sure. So sort of maybe less on the red team and whack-a-mole and more on the preventative measures we take. Can you talk a little bit as well about our technical and operational security measures that we have in place to try and reduce risk, like role-based management, change management, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the major areas that customers bring up all the time, right? So when you're developing software, like for example, one of the big ones that came up, I guess it was about 18 months, 24 months ago. I don't remember exactly the date or time, but SolarWinds came about, and that was essentially a supply chain attack, right? Where you're able to introduce code into the environment and sort of impact how the code is working, and as a result create gather a whole bunch of data and sort of misuse the tool from what it was intended to do. So given the fact that our tool is installed on organizations desktops, and that we're gathering this sort of data, there's obviously a lot of concern about that. And so what I would say is that as part of our development process, we follow a very strict SDLC program, where we keep our development, test, production, all those things separated. And then in terms of who's got access and how changes are made, there's very methodical number of steps that go through to be able to take something and write a piece of code somewhere and then actually introduce it to the product and actually roll it to production, right? So, developers can't just sort of jump into production and slam 100 lines of code into things, right? You go through your change management process, and in going through that sort of thing, that has to get multiple levels of management approval before something gets introduced. All of those changes get tested, and then it's sort of a secondary measure. Obviously, it's potentially that stuff is subject to to pen testing as well. So our developers themselves are trained on secure coding methodologies, for sort of the obvious sort of simple stuff to make sure that they're not accidentally introducing vulnerabilities in sort of basic code development. Then as part of our processes, our tools are looking for those. We run code scanners to try to find vulnerabilities that are written in there, to ensure that all those are fixed before the code rolls to production. And then on the back end, like I said, we're going to run it through pen testing, and if something slips through the first couple levels, then it should get caught in the pen testing phase, and also introduces vulnerability management to make sure we get it fixed and keep everything rolling.
Very cool. Hi, John. This is Megan. I'm really enjoying this conversation. It's cool to get this peek under the hood as someone who doesn't work anywhere near our security and compliance in the product. It's thank you for joining us. This is kind of interesting. I'm wondering, because I work in marketing, obviously, so I hear a lot about our different partnerships. And one partnership I hear about a lot is our partnership with AWS. So how does that partnership contribute to the scalability, to our security, to our data querying, especially for our large client bases?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at controls, security controls, I've been doing this 20 years, right? So I've seen it from a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different frameworks. Um, AWS is a central part of sort of our security program for certain components of our security program, right? So when you talk about physical security, we obviously have physical security controls built into our offices, right? With badge scans and CCTV cameras and things like that. We have, receptionists at the desk got to wear a visitor badge and all that sort of good hygiene stuff you have when you're walking through the office. If you bring a visitor into the office or a customer into the office for a day. But in terms of, the hardened data center aspect, when you talk about redundancy, you talk about the physical controls, right? AWS is our major provider. That's where all of our customer data goes, right? So all of those sort of physical controls of, visitor access and badges and man traps and security and, gates, where you can't drive your car onto the property and all that sort of stuff. AWS handles all that, right? And so they have, a number of assessments, just like we go through. We do our SOC 2 and we go through our ISO certifications, things like that. AWS has probably got about 24 different certifications they go through, where they test their physical controls, and they ensure that the data centers are hardened and nobody can go in and out, and they handle all that access. We get requests from our customers from time to time to be able to audit our data centers, so to speak. We are not even allowed in AWS's data centers. All right. We're a customer of theirs. We spend millions of dollars with them. But as an AWS customer, you can't just sort of walk up to their building and go, "Hey, I spent a lot of money with you. Can I come in?" Like that's not how that part works. In addition to that, besides sort of the physical aspects of what AWS provides us, there's two sort of key components that, customers rely upon. One of which is on sort of scalability and reliability, right? So, we use pretty much all cloud native tools, and we use every AWS service that we can for, facilitate simplicity and have everything sort of under one umbrella, for load balancing, for, scalability, be able to scale up, scale down if necessary, be able to do, predictive modeling on, how much consumption we're going to need in the cloud, disk space usage, things like that. So, we do get some questions from customers from time to time about, how do we, if I'm going to put X number of, I'm going to put 300,000 collectors into your environment, how do I know they're all going to work? And AWS can be able to handle all that stuff, right? So that's been tested, and we've got, sort of predictive, scalability teams that go through and look, to make sure we're going to have the adequate resources in place. And I think the last piece is with sort of old school, disaster recovery and business continuity and things like that. We use AWS availability zones, right? So it used to be, 10, 15 years ago, if you had a data center, you usually had to have two, right? You'd have a data center in New York and you'd have one in Washington, D.C., or one in New York and Denver, or whatever it might be, because you'd have to split those data centers, and you'd have to have sort of adequate distance between the data centers in case there was a disaster, hurricane, some sort of, natural disaster event, earthquake, whatnot. And so you'd have to have sort of redundancy there to make sure that if one site went down, the other one could handle it. Well, all of that stuff is sort of dynamically handled by AWS, right? So availability zones are designed such a way that, a customer can pick whatever region they want. So they can say, if they're a US-based company, they want to put their data into US East or US West or whatever it might be in AWS. And all of their data will be located in the United States, including the logs, including all the sort of subsequent data that comes out of there, the administrative data, whatnot. That all stays where they want it to stay. Similarly, for a European customer, they can pick Germany or the UK or wherever they want, to host their data. And we've also got sites in the Middle East. We've got sites in Asia Pac, to allow us to, locate data in certain places. And within those availability zones, there's automatic failover. So the idea is that when you're in, the UK, zone, you're not in one data center. You're really in like 3 or 4. And the idea is that one data center was to come offline, well, because of the load balancing that they have at AWS, essentially, your data will just continue to flow on the other three like nothing happened, right? And there's really nothing we need to do. If there was a major disruption where a couple data centers came down, like we might have to look at that and sort of see what's going on. But to my knowledge, I'm knocking on wood, that hasn't happened. But the idea is that when you're looking at that, all of that stuff is just sort of taken care of, right? You don't have to worry about you worry about the application. You can worry about new features. You can worry about, hardening and reliability and things like that. You don't have to worry about sort of like these extraneous factors. So AWS is is a key partner for us. And customers feel safe knowing that we don't have our own personal cloud. We're not running our own data center. They don't have to worry about all that stuff. It's, there's the general level of acceptance in the industry where, if you're using AWS, you're probably, going to be okay in a lot of those regards.
Thank you. That was a great explanation of that. Clearly a pretty key partner for us. You mentioned a couple times in that answer and earlier in the podcast, some certifications that we have. So I know this might turn into just listing it out, but you don't have to do that. But what are some of the key ones, the key security and compliance certifications we have, and why are they essential for client trust and market differentiation, and what sets us apart in this area?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, we have ISO 27001, and from a cybersecurity standpoint, that is universally accepted. It's one of the major industry standards, for following a set of guidelines, having a certain set of controls in place, and you've sort of got your ducks in a row, and it covers a broad scope of what you've got. Right. So ISO 27001 is sort of the foundational piece of our sort of cyber program, how we think about things, how we protect things, and how we enforce those. And we go through audits every year, and maintain our certification on an annual basis. We get a new certificate every summer, from our auditors for ISO 27001. And over time, we've actually extended that because ISO is always developing new certifications for things as things change. So we have, ISO 27017, which is for cloud providers, I believe. And then we have 18, which is for privacy in the cloud. And then 27701, which is for, maintaining a privacy management system. So like I said, it's having, grown up in the EU and started in the EU, privacy is a central focus. We're very focused on GDPR. And so having these certifications in place show that it's not an afterthought for us. It's something that we have to work towards every day to maintain these certifications, and it's key. And then I would say, the other major certification, when you have those other things in place, it sort of shows you've got certain controls there. What we do is something called SOC 2 Type 2 certification, which is, an audited process that shows that you're maintaining these processes over time, right? So it's one thing to sort of say you have change management in place and, you've got to get certain levels of approvals to get a change pushed through, or that, you've got onboarding techniques where people get background screened like before they get hired to make sure you're not hiring, a hacker from, Eastern Europe or something. But the idea is that when you go through the SOC 2 Type 2 certification, you have to present to the auditors and show that, okay, we hired, these 300 people this year. And in doing so, they'll say, okay, they'll randomly select, 20 different, new hires and say, show me where you did the background screens for these 20 people before they started, as they were coming on board. And we have to be able to demonstrate that, we HR did the certificate, did the background check, we got the results, came back clean, they got hired, all that sort of stuff. So, SOC 2 Type 2 is going to keep you honest, that you can't just sort of say you do something, because if you don't, the auditors will find it and they'll catch it. And then, our customers ask us for a copy of those reports and they're going to ask us questions too. So, I'd say those are probably the biggest ones. I would say that, probably the thing that's top of mind for a lot of customers, and I deal with questions sort of globally, is it's happened a lot more in the last 5 years, especially I'd say in the last 3, is countries are coming up with more and more specific certifications to their country and their geographic region, so to speak. So, depending on, the countries we were operating in, like for things like privacy, Japan generally accepts EU certification or EU compliance as, essentially translating to what they require over there. But certain, especially for government agencies and government contractors and things like that, they want to see certain certifications for their country, which puts you sort of an approved list. So I know for the UK, we've got Cyber Essentials. In Spain, we've got ENS certification, which shows that, in addition to sort of all the good housekeeping stuff we do for the whole organization, that we also have to specifically respond to these countries' requirements to make sure we're upholding those. Generally, the idea is that if you're doing all the right stuff in those foundational ones, the other ones shouldn't be too bad. But there's always a couple of unique requirements that each country might have, or something they want to see, and you have to make sure you're adhering to all that stuff too. So, we have a compliance team that all they do all year round is support these certifications. They go through the audit cycles. The auditors go to our offices. They visit us in Spain and Switzerland and Boston, India. So they come and look at our controls. If we say we've got CCTV, they're going to come make sure that there's cameras there, like we say there are. So all those certifications are a lot of work to get. They're a lot of work to maintain, but it offers some level of reassurance to our customers that we're not just sort of saying this stuff during the sales cycle and once we've sold the software that we're good to go. We have to keep going with this and make sure we're maintaining our security to a level that's going to maintain these certifications and make our customers feel safe.
Given this level, John, of scrupulousness, obviously applied across the board here, how do you stay ahead of the curve in terms of new technologies and with it evolving industry standards?
Yeah, I mean, we have to keep track, of our tool. So every time, for example, if we were using a certain development platform or we're using, a certain, code repository, if we considered making a change to that, we have to think about all the impacts to all these existing certifications. Not only that, but also the processes that we're saying. So like I said, the change management stuff, if you were to change, if you were considered making a change to our change management tool set, you can't then just say, well, we're going to stop doing these 10 processes that, we used to do because we have a new tool now, right? You've got to make sure those tools can support our processes and the processes can work in those tools, right? So there's a lot of give and take with that. And so there's a constant level of sort of evaluation. And I'd say that, over time, as certain types of attacks happen in the media, where, something makes the New York Times or certain, or Washington Post or, London Financial Times, when there's a big attack that's announced, everybody then starts to look at that and say, okay, am I vulnerable to this? So, right. So when SolarWinds happened a couple of years back, everybody stopped and said, okay, that was really bad. And then are my tools going to potentially put me at risk for that? Right. And we're one of those tools people are going to evaluate. So we've got to constantly sort of stay on top of that. And I'd say things like, over the, next 12 to 18 months, are things like AI, and the inclusion of AI. Some customers can't wait for it because they want to use the benefits of it. They want to, they want the efficiencies, they want the speed. While other customers, as I've seen, are very wary of it and they want a lot of controls around it. And they're very particular about, their use of AI and how that's going to work. And so in return, we need to keep up with that, right? So internally, we formed AI committees. We've putting together our policies, and there's a whole bunch of on the development side and on the legal side and everywhere else. There's going to be a whole bunch of responsibilities that are allocated to make sure that we don't just sort of throw AI into our tool very haphazardly. We've got to be very metered about it. We've got to make sure we've investigated it, we've tested it. The models are trained appropriately, that, we're using sort of industry standard tools. So, we use some of the things from Google and so on and so forth. Right. So, customers are going to, if we don't sort of stay on top of it, our customers will keep us honest, whether we like it or not. Right. So we've got to sort of stay at least in step with them, if not a step ahead of them, to make sure that when they ask the questions, say, okay, you're telling me you've got this new AI thing. Tell me how that works. We've got to be able to answer those questions, right? So it is sort of a constant reshaping and refining as to how things work. But it's what sort of keeps customers feeling comfortable and new customers feeling comfortable to join the platform and reap the benefits.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good last note, actually, John. And as I think Megan used the phrase, it was great to get a peek under the hood talking to you today. It really was. And great illustration of why this show is so much fun. You get particular experts and you hear about really, really interesting topics. So it was great to talk to you. Hope you enjoy coming on the show. And we hope to see you again.
No, anytime you guys want to chat or, if there's any new developments, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help out.
Thanks so much, John. We appreciate it.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how Nexthink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nexthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.